The chamber rose like a cathedral carved from starlight and steel, its walls etched with symbols older than Earth itself. Representatives of species that had ruled the stars for millennia gathered in their tiers, their eyes glimmering with disdain as the human delegation was ushered to the central floor. Humanity's arrival in interstellar politics had been tolerated at first, a curiosity, a species expected to bow to precedent and accept its place at the margins. Instead, Earth had expanded rapidly, trading aggressively, settling disputed systems, and displaying a stubborn refusal to yield authority. For the Council, the matter had reached its breaking point. A towering figure of scaled flesh and flowing robes, speaking for the Council, announced the decree. The words rang across the chamber with the certainty of absolute authority. Humanity was to disband its fleets within a cycle, surrender strategic colonies to neutral oversight, and submit all weapons research to Council inspection. Non-compliance would be treated as hostility against the entire collective. The ultimatum was framed not as negotiation but as inevitable law, the way a storm declares itself to the sea. There was no vote, no appeal, no compromise. It was, as they called it, the final warning. The alien voice resonated with condescension, framing humanity as a reckless child stumbling through a galaxy of fragile order, a creature wielding fire and a library of tinder. Charts of human conflicts were displayed as evidence, projections of population growth and resource expansion offered as proof of instability. The Council painted Earth as a destabilizing infection that must either submit to regulation or be cut out before it spread further. They did not disguise their contempt. To them, humans were dangerous precisely because they were too ambitious, too adaptive, too unwilling to remain in chains. The delegates of Earth listened in silence. They did not interrupt, did not bargain, did not make the desperate pleas the Council expected. No visible emotion broke through their measured expressions. The gallery of alien envoys watched closely for signs of panic, for the slump of defeated shoulders, for the tremor of fear. None came. Instead, the human delegation stood motionless, their stillness more unnerving than protest could have been. Where others had collapsed into obedience, humanity presented only a calm, quiet face. The Council misread the silence. They believed it was hesitation, the paralysis of a lesser species confronted by inevitable authority. They took it as proof their pressure was working, that humans, like so many before them, would bow in the end. Yet there were whispers in the chamber, low exchanges between species who had dealt with humanity directly. Merchants who remembered how Earth negotiated trade agreements with ruthless precision. Soldiers who recalled battles on the frontier where human fleets did not retreat until the last vessel fell silent. Colonists who had seen human settlers survive in hostile worlds where no other species dared to linger. Those whispers spoke not of fear but of calculation, and of a dangerous patience. The proclamation ended with the Council speaker declaring that failure to comply would trigger immediate sanctions, and if sanctions failed, war on a scale humanity could not hope to endure. The words were final, uttered with the casual arrogance of powers convinced of their superiority. Around the chamber, representatives of older empires nodded in satisfaction, confident that another rebellious species had been put back in its place before it grew too large. They believed history was repeating itself. They did not see that history was breaking. When the speaker's echo faded, the chamber hung in silence. Every eye turned to the humans, expecting an appeal or a desperate counteroffer. What they received was a quiet acknowledgement, no more than a statement that the words of the Council had been heard and recorded. Nothing else was offered. No promises, no explanations, no concessions. Just silence that settled heavier than any speech could. The Council interpreted it as submission. A few recognized it for what it was, the stillness of something waiting, something not yet revealed. Humanity left the chamber without fanfare. The Council returned to its endless deliberations, congratulating itself on reasserting order. But unease rippled among those who had watched closely. For the first time, the final warning had not ended with bowed heads or broken wills. It had ended with silence that felt like the edge of a blade yet to be drawn. And in that silence, the galaxy trembled, though most did not yet realize why. The chamber emptied, but the echoes of the ultimatum lingered in every corridor of galactic power. Within hours, debates erupted across the council's private halls, among diplomats, military strategists, and ancient species who had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. The official decree was clear, but confidence did not silence unease. Humanity's reaction, or lack of one, pressed heavily against their expectations, and the absence of submission unsettled even those who pretended certainty. Some argued the humans would break as all others had. History favored the council. For thousands of years, newly ascended species confronted with overwhelming force had bent the knee, dismantled their war machines, and accepted the leash of supervision. It had always been efficient: display dominance, issue the warning, and wait for compliance. Humanity had surely heard the lesson. The silence they gave must mean shock. They would need only days to gather the courage to beg forgiveness. That was the opinion of the arrogant and the secure. Others were not convinced. They studied humanity's record in detail, and the patterns they found disturbed them. No species had fought as fiercely against its own kind, yet none had endured as completely. Empires had risen and collapsed on Earth in a fraction of the time it took other civilizations to evolve past tribal conflict, yet humans advanced with relentless speed. They had burned themselves in nuclear fire, and then rebuilt with stubborn vigor. They had crossed oceans of space with primitive drives and planted flags where survival should have been impossible. To call them reckless was accurate. To believe they would accept change was dangerous. Voices from species long cowed by the council whispered their warnings. Merchants who had traded with Earth recalled how negotiations ended with humans securing deals others thought impossible, not through brute force, but through unyielding persistence. Soldiers who had faced human fleets on border disputes remembered an enemy that fought to the last hull, denying the council easy victories. Colonists told stories of humans on hostile worlds who thrived where others fled, carving out settlements in conditions thought uninhabitable. Every tale added weight to the fear that humanity's silence was not submission, but calculation. The council dismissed these voices in public. The official position remained firm. Humans were dangerous, but still bound by the same laws of fear and survival as all others. They would bend. Yet behind closed doors, doubts grew. The stillness of the human delegation replayed in memory, unsettling in its calm. Fear was familiar. Fear showed in trembling voices, bowed heads, desperate bargains. The humans had shown none of it. Their refusal to answer beyond acknowledgement had carried a different quality, like the surface of water unbroken, concealing the currents beneath. Among the more cautious species, predictions turned grim. If humanity refused the ultimatum, war would follow. Yet unlike others, humans would not face annihilation passively. They would resist, not with ritual displays or token fleets, but with everything they possessed. Analysts laid out projections of asymmetric strategies: sabotage, relentless counterstrikes, exploitation of weaknesses in council bureaucracy. They warned that humans fought wars not to preserve honor, but to survive, and survival gave them an edge no doctrine accounted for. Despite these warnings, arrogance prevailed. The majority believed in the precedent of thousands of years. No empire had ever withstood the combined will of the council, and none ever would. Humanity was bold, but boldness without compliance always ended in ruin. That was the narrative repeated in speeches and memos, a chorus meant to reassure even as unease deepened. Still, beneath the veneer of confidence, speculation grew like a shadow. What if the silence meant preparation? What if humanity's refusal to protest was not weakness, but resolve? Few dared speak such thoughts aloud, for to do so was to question the very authority of the council itself. Yet in private, among trusted circles, those questions spread. And though drowned out by official proclamations of certainty, the unease persisted, gnawing at the edges of every prediction. The decree had been given, but no one could deny the truth lingering at the edges of every conversation. For the first time in living memory, the council had issued its final warning, and the answer had not been immediate surrender. It had been silence. And in that silence, something far more dangerous than fear might be taking root. The message from Earth arrived days later, carried through official channels in the most routine manner, stripped of drama or ornament. It was a single statement, polite in tone, acknowledging receipt of the Council's directive and confirming that the words had been recorded. Nothing else accompanied it. There was no acceptance, no resistance, no negotiation. Just acknowledgement. The Council expected panic or protest, yet what came was colder than defiance, indifference. Behind closed doors on Earth, a different rhythm unfolded. Factories once dormant shifted into relentless motion. Orbital docks lit with sudden activity as ships under construction were accelerated without public announcement. Logistics networks that had been considered commercial in nature rerouted to military depots. Civilian industries began operating at new quotas, their adjustments subtle enough to avoid alien scrutiny but efficient enough to prepare for mobilization. There were no speeches broadcast to the stars, no propaganda, no fiery declarations. The movements were quiet, efficient, disciplined. Humanity had learned its lesson from its own bloody history. Wars were not won through noise or ceremony. They were won through preparation, secrecy, and willpower. The Council expected chest-thumping bravado, but Earth offered nothing that could be dismissed as bluster. Instead, preparations unfolded in silence, each step a piece of a larger pattern invisible to those who underestimated them. Fleets long thought limited in number expanded rapidly. Reserve crews, previously considered inactive, were recalled under the guise of training exercises. Colonies on harsh frontier worlds received new shipments of supplies, not for growth, but for fortification. Black projects hidden beneath layers of secrecy emerged into careful execution. Every move was calculated, deliberate, and shielded from foreign eyes by the sheer complexity of human networks. Where other civilizations flaunted their strength to dissuade attack, humanity concealed its intent to ensure surprise. To outside observers, Earth appeared calm. Markets functioned, news outlets spoke of routine developments, and ambassadors carried themselves with measured civility. The Council mistook this for paralysis. Analysts concluded that humans were overwhelmed by the weight of the ultimatum and were stalling before inevitable submission. They did not see the coordination occurring behind that facade. The silence was not hesitation, it was the sound of machinery grinding forward with unstoppable purpose. Within the ranks of human leadership, discussions were brief and free of pretense. The Council's decree was not viewed as a demand to be debated, but as a hostile declaration requiring response. Plans already drawn for such contingencies were activated without fanfare. Leaders did not ask whether to resist, only how best to shape the form of that resistance. The decision was unanimous: no surrender, no submission, no compromise. The first layers of strategy focused not on direct confrontation but on securing survival. Supply caches were hidden across remote systems, fleets divided into groups that could function independently, communication relays upgraded to withstand disruption. Humanity understood that the Council's strength lay in its overwhelming unity, and the only way to endure was to deny them a single decisive victory. Every move prepared for a long, grinding conflict in which adaptability and endurance would decide the outcome. On alien worlds, whispers of these movements began to circulate. Traders reported strange surges in human demand for rare metals. Freight captains spoke of heavily armed convoys moving through quiet sectors. Intelligence networks noted spikes in encrypted communications routed through obscure channels. None of it amounted to proof, but together it formed a picture of unease. Still, the Council dismissed it, content in their belief that humans lacked the capacity to resist true power. The quiet efficiency of Earth's preparations carried a quality that unsettled even seasoned observers. It was not the behavior of a frightened civilization awaiting punishment. It was the behavior of a predator conserving energy before a strike. Humanity made no threats, raised no banners, and issued no speeches. Their silence was louder than defiance, because it left the galaxy with nothing to measure, nothing to predict, nothing to control. It was the kind of silence that preceded storms. The first movements of humanity's reply unfolded without announcement. Along disputed borders, alien patrols reported unusual contacts, human fleets appearing suddenly in ordered formations, not advancing, not retreating, simply holding position as though daring confrontation. These fleets made no transmissions, offered no challenges, and issued no demands. They were present, silent and immovable, their very existence a statement sharper than any declaration could have been. The message was clear: humans would not be moved by threats, and they would not vanish into obscurity. Across the galactic core, entire sectors experienced sudden disruptions. Council communication relays, believed untouchable, went dark for hours. Traffic across trade lanes collapsed into chaos as navigation systems faltered. Attempts to trace the sabotage found nothing but shadows, leaving only speculation that human operatives had infiltrated networks long considered secure. No proof was discovered, yet suspicion spread rapidly. Species who had once scoffed at human ingenuity began whispering that Earth possessed talents the Council had underestimated, and worse, they seemed willing to employ them without hesitation. Supply chains once thought invulnerable began to fray. Convoys of essential resources vanished without trace, their last signals distorted and fragmented. Ports reported incidents of equipment failure, data corruption, and unexplained sabotage. Each occurrence was small, deniable, and frustratingly difficult to attribute. But the pattern was undeniable. Wherever pressure mounted against Earth, pressure returned in kind. It was not war declared openly but war conducted in shadows, with precision that unsettled the most disciplined strategists. The Council convened emergency sessions to interpret the developments. Some demanded immediate retaliation, calling for fleets to descend upon human colonies and crush defiance before it spread further. Others urged caution, pointing to the absence of direct human threats, insisting the disruptions might be coincidence or the work of rivals. But no matter how they framed the debate, unease grew. The humans had said nothing since their acknowledgement, yet every day their presence pressed harder, not through words, but through actions carefully chosen to demonstrate capability without overextension. On frontier worlds, colonists awoke to find human ships in orbit, conducting maneuvers with chilling precision. They did not attack, but neither did they withdraw. For alien settlers, the effect was psychological devastation. Here was a species that had been given a final warning, yet instead of cowering, they stood watch at the very edges of Council authority. Fear spread faster than orders could contain it. Merchants rerouted trade, smugglers whispered that humanity had found ways to move unseen, and civilians began questioning whether the Council truly possessed the power it claimed. When the first official statement from Earth finally arrived, it consisted of a single transmission broadcast across secure channels. The message was stripped of rhetoric, delivered in the same measured tone as their earlier acknowledgement. "We heard your warning. This is ours." Nothing followed. No elaboration, no justification, no threat. The words landed with the weight of inevitability, carrying none of the embellishments that could be dismissed as arrogance. They were factual, simple, and chilling in their finality. For the Council, the statement was a shock not because of what was said, but because of what was not. Humanity had not offered excuses, had not explained their position, had not demanded negotiation. They had not asked for allies or sought compromise. They had simply drawn a line, invisible yet unmistakable. The silence that followed the brief transmission became a presence of its own, forcing even the most arrogant rulers to acknowledge that something unprecedented was unfolding. Whispers began spreading among the lesser species who had long suffered under Council decrees. They had witnessed countless ultimatums before, but none had ever been answered in this manner. Humanity was not defiant in the traditional sense. They did not scream their rebellion. Instead, they responded with a coldness that implied absolute conviction. It was not the rebellion of the desperate. It was the reply of an equal unwilling to bow. The galaxy had sought to discipline humanity with threats of annihilation. What it received instead was a demonstration of restraint laced with menace, a warning delivered not with fire, but with silence sharpened into a blade. The Council realized too late that the power they believed uncontested had been challenged, not with noise, but with an implacable calm that promised consequences beyond their ability to predict. The Council gathered again under an atmosphere heavy with unease. Their chamber, once a symbol of unquestioned authority, now echoed with voices strained by doubt. The final warning they had issued was supposed to end the matter, but the galaxy was no longer speaking of compliance. It was speaking of humanity. Reports flowed in from every frontier, fleets observed standing watch, communications disrupted, supply lines collapsing under invisible pressure. Nothing had been admitted, yet all of it pointed back to Earth. What unsettled the Council most was that humanity had not boasted of these actions. They had not even claimed responsibility. The silence surrounding their moves made them more menacing than open war. Attempts to escalate faltered before they began. Fleets sent to remind human colonies of the Council's power found themselves shadowed by ships that refused to retreat. The encounters ended without fire, but the tension drained morale faster than battle ever could. Admirals returned unsettled, reporting that human vessels maneuvered with a discipline that suggested rehearsed strategies for every possible scenario. No intimidation worked. Each meeting ended the same way: humans in formation, unyielding, wordless. The implication was louder than any defiance. Among the older empires, debate sharpened. Some insisted on full-scale war, convinced that overwhelming force would erase the human problem before it grew beyond control. Yet others hesitated. The disruptions already felt across trade networks revealed a truth many tried to deny. Even without a formal declaration, humanity was capable of inflicting damage disproportionate to its size. If they could already strike supply routes, infiltrate systems, and undermine communications, what would happen if they unleashed their full strength? The risk of escalation no longer seemed theoretical. Civilian populations across the galaxy added to the pressure. Colonies once loyal to the Council began questioning the wisdom of provoking a species that acted with such calculated restraint. Smaller powers, long forced into submission, whispered of opportunity. If humanity could resist, perhaps the Council was not invincible. Doubt spread in waves, eroding the perception of absolute control that had held for millennia. The Council's authority was fraying not from external conquest, but from the silent defiance of a single species refusing to bend. When the Council finally demanded a direct human reply, what returned was as cold as every action before. The transmission was brief, without flourish or ornament, spoken in the same measured tone as the first acknowledgement. "We will not be warned again." Nothing followed. The channel closed. That single line shook the chamber more than 1,000 threats could have done. It was not defiance shouted in rage, nor arrogance draped in pride. It was a fact, delivered with the finality of iron. For the first time in memory, the Council faced a species that refused to play by established rules. Others had begged for mercy, negotiated compromises, or screamed their defiance until they were crushed. Humanity had done none of these. They had remained silent when threatened, moved with precision when tested, and replied with a simplicity that stripped away every illusion of control. In that simplicity lay something terrifying, the certainty of a species that had already decided its course and would not be swayed. The chamber fell into argument, but beneath the noise ran a current none could deny. Humanity was no longer a minor participant at the edges of civilization. They had forced recognition not through conquest, but by demonstrating that they could not be commanded. To escalate further meant risking a war that might ignite rebellion across countless worlds. To retreat meant admitting that the Council's authority was not absolute. Either choice carried consequences that would reshape the balance of the galaxy. In the silence following humanity's final words, the truth settled like stone. The galaxy had attempted to dictate terms, and Earth had replied not with submission, not with rebellion, but with a declaration of equality enforced through cold resolve. The Council could still destroy planets, could still summon fleets, but it could no longer claim unquestioned dominance. Humanity had changed the language of power. Their refusal was not noise, not spectacle, it was the quiet assertion of a species prepared to endure anything rather than kneel. And in that quiet, the galaxy finally understood, the era of absolute control was ending, and a new balance, forged by humanity's will, had begun.